Hi, my name is Janine Hall, and I remember 10 years ago when I had my first son, and they first told me that he might have cerebral palsy. That for me was one of the most scariest times in my life besides his birth. And I remember just trying to look up information on what cerebral palsy was and how to deal with it, how long my son was going to live, and everything. And it was just so scary. Everything that I read online then was, death. He wasn't going to live long. I just felt like I was so deep in the diagnosis of not knowing what it was that I just needed somebody to sit me down and tell me exactly what it was. And I've designed this speech so that other parents who are faced with the same issues can watch this and get a better understanding in a quicker way than having to go through and read resources upon resources. So first of all, I would like to start out with, what is cerebral palsy? And the CDC.gov definition is a group of disorders that affect a person's ability to move and maintain balance and posture. Cerebral, meaning that it affects the brain, and palsy, meaning weakness or problems with using the muscles. And CP is the most common motor disability in childhood. Statistics of cerebral palsy in the US is that about 1 in 345 children in the United States have cerebral palsy. So if you have a room of 345 children, you're going to have at least one of those children that has some form of cerebral palsy. And CP occurs more for children that are born preterm or at low birth weight. And medical costs for children with CP are 10 times higher than a normal child that has no disabilities or intellectual disabilities. Now, what causes cerebral palsy? Cerebral palsy is caused by abnormal development of the brain or damage to the developing brain that affects a child's ability to control his or her muscles. So, low birth weight, premature birth, multiple births, twins, triplets, etc. Anywhere where they're going to be taking nutrients from each other, possibly. Infertility treatments, infections during pregnancy, jaundice, medical conditions of the mother, anything that the mother has going on. If the mother has epilepsy or any pre-existing medical conditions can affect the baby. And then, of course, birth complications. The different types of cerebral palsy are spasticity, which means that the child is going to have really stiff muscles. They are constantly going to be tight in their muscles, and they need to have their muscles relaxed constantly with physical therapy. Dyskinesia is uncontrollable movement, so they're going to have almost as like a seizure type movement all the time. They're either going to have it really rapid or really slow. And ataxia means that they're going to have poor balance and poor coordination. Spastic cerebral palsy makes up about 80% of cerebral palsy. The three types of spastic cerebral palsy, if we want to break that down, is diplegia, where this is stiffness that is mostly in the patient's legs. Hemiplegia is one side of the child's body is affected. And quadriplegia means that both the arms and the legs, the trunk and the face are affected. This is the most severe form of cerebral palsy. Most of the body will be affected in quadriplegia. And when you have quadriplegic cerebral palsy, this also leads to other developmental disabilities, such as intellectual disabilities and motor skills, seizures, vision, hearing, and speech. Dyskinetic cerebral palsy, as I said before, is uncontrollable movements in the hands, the arms, the feet, and the legs. Now it can be slow movements that they're constantly doing all the time, or they can be fast, jerky movements all the time, and the face and the tongue can be affected by this. So this child is most likely going to have a problem with sucking on a binky, on a bottle, sucking through a straw. They're going to have problems with swallowing, and they're also going to have problems with talking because their motor functions are not up to par as they should be due to the brain damage. Ataxic cerebral palsy, these people have problems with the balance and the coordination, so this is going to affect their walking, their quick movements, and trouble controlling hands with their coordinated movements. So they're going to have problems with being able to write or being able to color. And then of course you also have the mixed cerebral palsy, where this is meaning that you have multiple symptoms of all of the types of cerebral palsy. So if you have trouble with coloring and writing, but you also have problems with balancing and all the other things that are listed for the other cerebral palsies, then you have a mixed cerebral palsy. Early signs that your child has cerebral palsy would be stiffness to the body. When you try to pick your child up and they stiffen up and they act as if they're trying to push you away. Hands kept in fists. One way that they told me when my son was born that they had a suspicion of him having cerebral palsy is he kept his hand in a fist, and he was like Superman, as they called it. He would keep this hand in a fist and he would grab for things. Or my son in particular is quadriplegic, so he had problems with both of his fists. He couldn't reach for stuff, and he was very stiff all the time. This could also, symptoms or signs of early cerebral palsy could also be floppiness of the body. Some children are very loose and have no control, can't hold their head up. When the child is picked up, their legs cross or scissor. That is how my son is, because he's a quadriplegic, so his legs are so tight that it causes his legs to scissor across. And when the child starts crawling, if they crawl in an unbalanced manner where they're flopping to one side, they're not able to stay up on all fours, then that is also a sign, an early sign of cerebral palsy. First, you want to start out with finding your diagnosis. You want to get your pediatrician and most likely your team from the hospital, and you want to start with developmental monitoring. Most of the time this happens when they have you go to a special school. In my county, it's called the Early On Prevention Program, and through this program they develop different tests and motor courses and motor activities for your child to do to determine how bad the severity is of their disability. So you're going to track the growth and the development over time as you would with a normal child, but you're not going to see your child hitting milestones like you would with a normal child that has no developmental disability. And then of course developmental screening was the tests and everything. Treatment for cerebral palsy is therapy. You can never have too much therapy for a child with cerebral palsy, because the more that you move with them, the more that you do with them, the better their success is going to be. So with my son, we started out, he was diagnosed at 2 months old, and we started out with speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy really early on. I think we started at 18 months with him for those things. Speech therapy is going to help your child with speech production, so it's going to help them try and, as a baby, make the coo and the ka sounds and try and learn how to use your breast support. taking deep breaths so that you can push out more than one word at a time, or just knowing how to move the body in certain ways so that you can make different sounds. And that's also with language processing, being able to understand words and what words mean. And communication skills, as I said, how to move your mouth to go from an E sound to a oo sound, and so on and so forth, as well as swallowing deficits and certain ways on how to swallow is also a speech therapy thing. And if a speech therapist notices that your child is having trouble with swallowing, then they will recommend that you go do a swallow study, because that also can affect how successful your child is at speech therapy. That is one of the biggest factors of them being able to develop speech skills, is them having control of the muscles in their face and in their throat. Occupational therapy, in the Oxford Dictionary, the definition is rehabilitation through the performance of activities required in daily life. So examples of occupational therapy is feeding, brushing teeth, tying shoes. So when you go to occupational therapy, they're pretty much going to help your child develop the movements that they need to be able to do all of the things that they should do in a daily life. When I would take my son to occupational therapy, he would do all of these things. He would practice with feeding because he did not have much movement in his arms. So it stretched muscles, turning muscles, ways that muscles didn't go, so that you can get the muscle memory in the child's mind so that they're more successful. And then you have physical therapy, and Webster's Dictionary of Physical Therapy is therapy for the preservation, enhancement, or restoration of movement and physical function. This physical therapy utilizes therapeutic exercises such as yoga, or literally just sitting on a bench and standing up, moving the muscles in the legs. Physical modalities such as massaging the muscles and loosening the muscles up, and electrotherapy, which is hooking patches to the child's muscles to send impulses to the muscles to remind the child, or more medically termed, to send signals to the brain to remind the child that, hey, there's a muscle there and you need to use it. We tried electrotherapy with my son, and he was really successful with it. He went from not being able to move his legs to being able to take his leg and move it back, because it sent those shocks through his legs and said, hey, I'm a muscle and I need to move, and this is the way that I need to move. And the shock tells the child which way to move the muscle. And then physical therapy also utilizes patient education and training. So not only is my child in physical therapy, but I sit with my child while they have physical therapy so that I can learn how to do the therapy practices at home with him too, because muscle memory is very, very important with children, and moving in repetitious style or doing it over and over and over and over and over with your child is going to help your child be the most successful with movement. And physical therapy also utilizes assistive devices, so walkers, wheelchairs, exercise bikes. My son liked to do a gait trainer. He doesn't have very much balance with his body, so a gait trainer is a walker, but it also has the core support, so then that way it'll hold him up and he can just focus on walking. And then he also has things such as a Benic vest, and the Benic vest keeps his core support held up so that he doesn't have to worry about keeping his core support up and moving his hands. He has his core support taken care of so that his hands can learn to do work at that point. One doctor that I would recommend that is your most important doctor besides besides your pediatrician, obviously. And obviously, if your child has a heart condition, you know, that's important. But your rehabilitation specialist is the doctor that is going to play the most important role in the success of the movement for your CP child. Goodwin.edu definition is a certified medical professional that specializes in assessing a client's need and eligibility for community services. This person coordinates activities accordingly and counsels individuals on goals and objectives. May also provide career services like job searching and interview preparation. So this person literally is going to say, okay, you're going to give your child a diagnosis. As my son, he's spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. So that means that his body is super tight all the time. And he is quadriplegic, so it affects all 4 of his limbs, his trunk, and his face. So the rehabilitation specialists say, okay, well, he's going to need speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. They're automatically going to know that. And then they're going to tell you what equipment you're going to need as a parent and which pieces of equipment you're going to need before others. So this person's responsible for sending in a referral to the insurance company for me to be able to get a wheelchair for my son, the gait trainer needs for my son, as well as any other therapies that they would recommend for my son to be successful with being able to achieve the most mobility possible. The life expectancy of someone with cerebral palsy. Now, according to cerebralpalsyfacts.org, it's difficult to calculate the expectancy of a person with cerebral palsy because it's literally going to go off the level of functional disability. So you have your cognition, or what they're going to understand, their mobility, how much they can move around, and their vision, and then their manual, like what they can actually do for themselves. Severe disabilities in all 4 of the functional disability categories have about a 50% probability of surviving age 13. So if you have functional disability in all 4 of those categories, then chances are you're not going to have that long of a life. And a 25% chance of surviving to 30 if you do have all 4 of those things. Factors that impact how long a child with cerebral palsy can live is the number of impairments, as I was saying, how many things are wrong with your child, and the severity of it. Can your child feed themselves? Does your child have a feeding tube? Can your child sit up on its own? Can your child walk? All of those things. Any life-threatening complications. Does your child have heart issues? Because that's also, cerebral palsy is damage of the brain. So if your brain's not telling your heart to work properly, or if your brain's not telling your legs that they need to move like they're supposed to, all those things are factors. Also factors are how well your caretakers treat your condition. So how well you treat your child's cerebral palsy, if you're taking them to cerebral palsy, or if you're taking them to therapy, if you're doing all the things that you need to do, all of the things that you need to do to make sure that your child has the best quality life as possible. And then also mobility restrictions if your child's in a wheelchair, feeding, or if difficulties in malnutrition. If your child is eating through a G-tube, that does give the child the nutritions and stuff, because you have a special formula that you give your child, and that makes sure that they get all of the nutrients that they need, all the vitamins, but you do not get everything and all the best nutrients as you would is eating normally. If your child has seizures, that is also another risk factor. Obviously, if your child has seizures, that's going to cause lack of oxygen to the brain. that can cause long-term effects if they last too long or if they are too severe. Their ability to communicate is going to shorten their life. They're not going to be able to tell you what they need. So a CP child can't tell you that they're hungry if they don't have communication skills, and so on and so forth, as well as respiratory issues. If a child has respiratory issues, obviously they're going to have lung problems with their breathing, and this is going to cause other problems with their quality of life and health risks if your child is susceptible to getting sick and things like that. That's all risks of your child, shortening your child's life and all that thing. So if your child, for instance, is quadriplegic, spastic, wheelchair bound, has no mobility whatsoever, does not speak, if they're so spastic that their arms are tied up and it causes respiratory issues, your child is not going to last as long as a child that can feed themselves and can talk and can walk and can move themselves around. What can you do as a CP parent? And I wish that this is one thing that somebody would have shared with me, like, what do you do next? Because that is the hardest thing. You're bombarded with all of this information or the diagnosis, and you feel lost as a parent. One big thing that I was always taught in the process of the last 10 years is you are your child's biggest advocate, and you need to speak up as much as possible whenever possible. You need to make sure that your child has everything that they need to be successful. If you need equipment for home, you speak up and you make sure that you get the equipment for home. If your child is in a program where they go to school, you need to make sure that your child has everything that they're going to have to be successful. Just as you would with a normal child going to normal school, except you have to think about things that you wouldn't normally think about with a child in general education, such as the handicap adaptability of the school. Listen to expert advice. Sometimes it's really hard because you know your child better than anybody else, and you know what works best for your child, and sometimes you are up against people saying this and this and this is what you need to do. For instance, my son was in an early intervention program when he was a child, and they said you should take him to go have a seizure study done to make sure that he's not having seizures. And I didn't feel comfortable with making my son go through one more test, and it ended up biting me in the butt because a year later my son ended up having seizures, and I could have prevented that by taking him to go get the study and having him put on medication instead of making him go through that to learn it. So you always need to know that the medical professionals or even your teachers in your early intervention programs, they are there to help you. They're not there to hurt you. They're there to help you have the most success as you can as a cerebral palsy parent. The best thing you can do as a parent is, I like to say, plan the work and work the plan. You have your rehabilitation specialist who is going to recommend all of the things that you need to do, and you need to sit down and you need to put them in a planner, and you need to say, okay, this is what I need to do, this is what I need to do, and you need to do the things that you plan to do, and don't let anything go unattended to. I know it seems like a lot, but if you really want the success of your child, you need to do all of the things so that they can get to that successful level. If you want them to be able to be more mobile, then you need to do the exercises with them. If you want them to have more words in their vocabulary, you need to work with them more. Not all children are going to be successful 100% with therapies, but it does help over a long period of time. Another thing is build your village. They say it takes a village to raise a child. In my opinion, it takes a village and a half to raise a child. Not only do I have to have a babysitter, but I have to have a babysitter that knows CPR. I have to have a babysitter that knows how to administer special medication for my child if he was to have a seizure. I have to have people constantly who are there for backup in case I need extra help. If I need extra help taking them to appointments and anything like that, I need extra people. So always build your village. And that is one of the biggest things you could do for your child with cerebral palsy. Make sure that they have their I's dotted and their T's crossed, and that you have people there to do that for you if you ain't there to do it. And as well as resources. When my son was a child, I felt bad going for extra resources that were available to him because I didn't want to take more funding than what I needed. And it's understandable where I was coming from, but at the same time, those things are put in place so that you can get everything that you need to get for your child. So where I should have had a walker for my child 3 years ago, I didn't get until last year because I didn't get the extra funding that I needed to get that I should have gotten. So most of the time, especially in my county, I know that you can reach out to your Department of Human Resources, and they actually have a special needs department in the Department of Human Resources, and they can help you with all of the resources and finding out if you are eligible for the resources and what resources are available for you. As in, my son has a wheelchair, so they have resources of people that can come and build me a wheelchair ramp. They have services that can get me diapers. They have resources that can help me with daycare, or they have special people that can come to your house so that you can literally get a couple-hour break to go and be able to go get your nails done, and it has to be something personal. So sometimes you think, nobody put me in this situation where I need to find help to take care of my child. Nobody chose to have this child but me, and I don't need other people paying for my child. But those resources are there to help you. Don't feel guilty about taking the resources that are available to you. And on top of everything, I think that the most important thing you can do as a CP parent is keep yourself healthy. Nobody's going to love, nobody's going to care for your child as much as you do. So you need to keep yourself healthy. I know I'm not the best looking person right now, but I do work out and I do lift weights, and I make sure that my 50-pound child is something that I can lift. And when he gets to the point where I can't lift him, I need to make sure that I get equipment in my house to be able to lift him. But I also need to eat healthy and do the right things to make sure that I am here to take care of my son for as long as his life lasts. And mostly, out of anything, don't be so hard on yourself. It's not easy being a cerebral palsy parent. It's not easy being a parent, but it's definitely not easy being a cerebral palsy parent. There's so much extra stuff. It's not just taking your kid to school. It's making sure how your kid's going to get to school. And if they take a bus that's for handicapped children, are there going to be assistants on the bus? Are these extra people that we have to deal with? Are they going to care for your child enough? Are they in good hands? And it's just so hard taking on all of the things that you have to take on. And I admit it, I was hard on myself, and I didn't think I could do a good job being my son's name is Daniel, being Daniel's mom, but I have done such a great job because I know that he has the best quality of life that he can. He is spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. He can't walk, but he can talk. He can army crawl, and we are working every single day through all of the therapies and all of the things that we've implemented to try and work on all of the areas that he's not the best in, to try and bring him up. And he's not reaching milestones. He's not, you know, it's very disheartening when they're not reaching the milestones. They're not where they should be. But I know by the smile on my son's face and the way that he looks at me that I mean something to him and that I'm doing a good job. And don't be hard on yourself, because you can give your child the best quality of life, and that's the best that you can do. I'm Janine Hall. Thank you. I hope this helps.